Congressional Capitols XIV, New York City Hall, 1785. The Western Land Ordinance, the Spanish Silver Dollar, Barbary States, and defunding the Delaware Falls Federal District. In January 1785, the United States and Congress assembled, reconvened in New York City Hall, its first session in the nation's new temporary capital. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia presided as president. After a decade of wandering from city to city, Congress had found shelter, but not stability. The Confederation was broke, its credit abroad collapsing, and its future uncertain. John Jay was confirmed as Secretary for Foreign Affairs. Philip Schuyler of New York was appointed commissioner to plan a permanent federal district near Trenton. But behind these formalities, the Union stood on fiscal quicksand. In early 1785, Congress issued the nation's first formal budget, a detailed report listing every federal salary and expense. Heading the document was the President's household, which included a private secretary earning $500, a steward at $550, and household expenses amounting to $11,203. In total, President Richard Henry Lee's official household was allocated $12,253 for the entire year. The entire civil establishment, which included Congress, Treasury, War, the Post Office, and Foreign Affairs, came to just $165,332.68. This was the first recorded executive budget in United States history, a lean Confederate bureaucracy without a true executive branch or a permanent home. In 1785, Congress gave the dollar real substance, adopting the Spanish-milled silver dollar, the world's most trusted coin, as the nation's monetary unit. In 1784, Thomas Jefferson, serving in the Confederation Congress, proposed a radical idea to base America's money on a single unit, the dollar, and divide it decimally into tenths and hundredths. The following year, under President Richard Henry Lee, the Confederation Congress adopted the dollar as the nation's unit of account, using the familiar Spanish mill coin as its model. Though Spanish silver remained in circulation, Jefferson's decimal system defined the value. That 1785 decision created the dollar and cent standard still used in the United States today. Every figure in that 1785 U.S. budget, from the President's table to the Treasury accounts, was reckoned in Spanish silver. Though Congress now sat in New York, its executive offices remained scattered. The War Office, the Post Office, and the Treasury were still in Philadelphia, where they had been since the Revolution. On February 9th, Congress ordered all three removed, with their papers and effects, to New York City. But orders were easier than transport. There was no federal building ready, no vaults, no funds. Only in August did Congress set a firm deadline, directing the Treasurer's office be moved to New York City by October 1st. By autumn, wagons of ledgers and strong boxes finally crossed the Hudson. For the first time, America's peacetime government was physically united in one city. 2 days later, on February 11th, Congress adopted regulations for the Office for Foreign Affairs, conceding to Secretary John Jay's demands. Jay had accepted the post only on the condition that his office report directly to Congress, not to a meddling committee, that he alone manage foreign correspondence and hire his clerks, that his archives remain secret, and that the department continue in operation when Congress was adjourned. By granting these terms, the United States created its first truly independent executive department, the prototype of the modern U.S. Department of State. On March 11th, Congress turned to a new peril, the Muslim corsairs of North Africa. American merchantmen, now sailing without British protection, were being seized in the Mediterranean by the Barbary states of Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and Morocco. These regencies, nominally under the Ottoman Empire, justified their actions under Islamic maritime law, jihad by sea against the infidel powers lacking treaty protection. Captured crews were enslaved or ransomed until a U.S. tribute secured their release. On March 11th, Congress formally directed Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin to negotiate treaties of peace and commerce, authorizing them to offer a tribute not exceeding $80,000 if essential to secure navigation rights, and to ransom any American captives on the most humane and economical terms possible. In a March 28, 1786 letter to Secretary John Jay, Jefferson and Adams described their meeting with the ambassador of Tripoli. They questioned the envoy on what right his nation had to make, and I quote, war upon nations who had done them no injury. We consider all mankind as our friends, who had done us no wrong, nor had given us any provocation. The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the law of their great prophet, that it was written in the Koran that all nations who should not acknowledge their authority were sinners, that it was the right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Mussulman who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. Unquote. In May 1785, the Grand Committee of Congress issued the nation's first comprehensive federal budget, a detailed accounting of every appropriation under the Articles of Confederation. The report called for $3 million in new revenue to cover foreign and domestic interest, military costs, and civil administration. Buried within its columns was the historic entry, $30,000 set aside for the federal buildings on the banks of the Delaware River. This marked the first congressional appropriation for a permanent seat of government, fulfilling the 1784 ordinance to establish a permanent U.S. federal capital on the banks of the Delaware near Trenton. However, Virginia delegates James Monroe and William Grayson, backed by Richard Henry Lee, schemed to strike the Delaware River appropriation from the already strained federal budget. 4 months later, on September 27, 1785, Congress finally passed its budget, but only after withdrawing the $30,000 allocation, effectively nullifying the Trenton Capitol project. This decision kept the seat of government in New York City and reignited the long-standing debate over the nation's permanent capital, a controversy that would not be resolved until 1790. Yet, as Congress defunded its own capital, it financed the future. Under President Lee's direction, Monroe, Grayson, Hugh Williamson, and David Howe drafted a plan to survey and sell the western lands ceded by the states. Building on Jefferson's 1784 vision, they replaced his theoretical boundaries with a rational grid, townships 6 miles square, divided into 36 sections of 640 acres each. Monroe and Grayson introduced the amendment that fixed the 6-mile township, creating the United States Public Land Survey System still in use today. 1 square mile in every township, Section 16 was reserved forever for public schools. New Englanders, William Samuel Johnson and David Howe, advanced this clause, ensuring that education would accompany every new settlement. It was the first national endowment for public education. That same year, Congress appointed John Adams as Minister to Britain, confirmed Thomas Jefferson as Minister to France, and recalled Benjamin Franklin after nearly a decade of service abroad. Henry Knox assumed the post of Secretary of War, while Secretary for Foreign Affairs John Jay was authorized to negotiate with Spain, which controlled New Orleans and had closed the Mississippi River, the essential artery of the western frontier. Jay sought to secure free navigation, but Spain demanded the United States renounce the river for 25 years. The proposal ignited fierce division. Northern merchants favored compromise for the sake of trade, while Western settlers saw it as treachery. The dispute exposed a widening sexual rift that foreshadowed the constitutional conflicts to come. In April, Congress had authorized a 700-man establishment to guard the western posts, but by November, with the Treasury empty and peace treaties pending, recruitment was suspended. Fewer than 150 regulars remained under arms, the lowest point of federal military power between Yorktown and the Constitution. In 1785, the United States and Congress assembled governed a vast continent on an annual civil budget of barely $3 million paid in Spanish silver. Yet within that austerity emerged the framework of a nation, an organized system of executive departments, the survey of western lands, a uniform monetary system, and a pledge to education. From a Congress lacking true power came a blueprint for order, mapping the land, defining the dollar, and charting the destiny of the United States of America.